We all know Coda as a tool that's meant to consolidate all other tools. We can take all our data from all over the place and sync it in, and what we cannot sync we can embed. But all this time there's been one crucial piece missing. Yes, you can bring in all your calendars and tasks from 5 other tools, but there was no way to combine them all into a single view, so that you could see all of them on one common calendar. Well, technically you could create yourself a table and a button and set it up so that it copies all the rows from different tables into your single table, but that is very tedious to set up, and frankly, even for me this is not something that I would do very eagerly. That's why today I'm presenting you the holy grail, the missing piece, my brand new pack that can do this for you and more. Let's go. Okay, let's start by installing it and adding our first table. Install the pack through any of the familiar ways, like you can find it in the insert panel and install it from here, or you can find it in the gallery and install it like this, or my favorite way is to just type in the / command. And yes, when you install the pack, you don't need to create any account. The pack doesn't use any external connections, it doesn't even connect to Coda API. It will render you a table only out of the data that you supply in its formula. Now that the pack is added, all you need to do is expand this formula table. It may take you a few seconds to load the add new table option here, and you can drag it into your page. And if you need another table like that, just do the same step. It will give you yet another option to add a new table. And if this option is grayed out for some reason, just collapse and expand the list once again. Or another way to add it is also through the / command. Just type in formula table. Pick the formula table from the tables list, wait for this option to load, it may take again a few seconds, and click on the new formula table. This way you can add yourself a virtually unlimited number of different formula tables. Okay, we've added a table, but it has no data yet, so let's set it up. To do that, you go into the table's options, and you have to set up the formula for its data. Here you have to write a formula that will create a 2-dimensional matrix, or a list of lists. Let's create something from the top of my mind for this introductory demo. This is gonna be our sample list of lists, and you can already see that here I'm mixing together all sorts of data. We have a text value, a number, a date, and even a person reference. And you can also mix in references and list of references to other tables. So we created our list of lists, but we cannot just pass it like that yet. If you try to sync it now, it will tell you that the provided data is not formed correctly. There are certain quirks in Coda that will prevent this list of lists to go into the pack as is. In fact, what the pack will do by default is create one single long list of all the values here. So to preserve the data structure, you have to go to this doc, and in the end of your list of lists formula, you have to use this piece of code here, which you can copy by clicking here, go back to your doc, and paste it in the end of your formula. Now you will click sync, and you will see that our data is rendered properly. What this formula does here is it inserts an empty item into the beginning to your matrix list. This will prevent Coda from collapsing these lists into one, and then it will wrap your matrix into an object with whatever key name, so that Coda can preserve all the data types, because without it, it will just convert every cell into text. This is one of those Coda tricks that only a handful of experts know and which gives my channel its name. Let's look at the table we've got. Actually, let's make it 2x3 so that it's easier to illustrate my next point. Alright, so what is the default behavior here? This outer list here is a list of rows. So each list here is one individual row, with each value here becoming the column 1, column 2, and so on. However, sometimes you will want this differently and supply these as column by column, with each list here becoming values on each separate column. To render your table like that, just change the orientation from rows to columns. Click refresh, and you can see that this table now added the third column, removed the third row, and repositioned all the data. Change it back to rows, and it will readjust its structure once again. Add the third row and remove the third column. The third parameter that you can set up on your table is column names. Yes, you can absolutely just go here and rename your columns like this. But this is manual, and sometimes you will already have a list of column names that you can read from some other table. So before you ever rename your columns manually here, you can give them their new names here, just like that, without a formula, and this will apply these names to the columns. But most frequently, of course, you will want to press the equals sign and go into the formula mode and read your list of columns from a table. Now, of course, when you have your formula table, you can create all sorts of views out of it. Like you can create charts and calendars and whatever you want it to accomplish. Okay, let's take a look at a few concrete examples of what you might want to use this pack for. The first use case that comes to my mind is building a transposed view. You know that Coda is not like sheets, and whenever you're adding data entries, these have to be rows, not columns. So your P&L report in Coda will look like this, with each month on a separate row. And then all the measures for those months, such as income, expenses, taxes, and so on, will be aggregated or calculated as columns. But we're not really used to looking at time-based reports like this. If you look at any examples of P&L reports, they will always be like this, with months going from left to right as columns. Because time flows from left to right, and this is how we instinctively look at it. And besides, on real-world reports, there can be quite a lot of measures, not just the 4 columns that we have. Unfortunately, in Coda, there is no native capability to transpose a table. I wholeheartedly hope that they add it. And of course, it is possible to just create the table manually and then populate it with formulas or buttons. I actually made that tutorial in the past. If you're curious, you can check it out. But of course, a much easier way to do this now would be to use a formula table. And here's how easily we can set it up. We create a list and we just enumerate all the columns from our original report. And that is pretty much it, and all we need is just to add that piece of code in the end. Press enter, don't change the orientation because these shall now become rows, and for the column names, use the month column. You can either use it directly, or we can actually make them shorter, so for each value, just take the first 3 letters. Press sync, and voila, you have your report. You can now select all the columns, make them smaller. You can also add a column here that's not a sync column, just to call your measures. Done. Add some styling as well, and we've got ourselves a nice and horizontal report. Now, these are 3 individual types of expenses. What shall we do if we want to have column of all expenses? There's 2 ways to go about it. The first and the best one is that you just add another column here and calculate it with a formula, like the sum of these 3 columns. And then you go into the settings for this transposed report and add it here, and that is it. But if for whatever reason in the world you don't want to do this, you can totally calculate it right here, because it's a formula, and formulas are super flexible in Coda. And here is how. So we just calculate yet another list out of values for each of the rows in the profit and loss table. Refresh, and here it is, and we just give it a name, all expenses. So you can do that too. Finally, what if you want to have a total over the whole year? Of course, you can create yourself a column and make a formula and start adding January plus February and so on, but you've already guessed it, we are smarter than that. What we can do is just go and edit our formula here so that in the end of these lists, we append the value that is the sum of all of these values. And the easiest way to do this, given that all the values in these lists are simple numbers or currencies and not are themselves lists, is to just list combine one value to the end of it. List combine, profit and loss, income, sum. And then copy and paste the same for all of the columns. And with this one, well, it should have been a column so that it would have been easier. But you can always just give it a name here, like this with name, and then do the same with it here. So here's our values, and we combine the sum of these values in the end. Refresh, and we've got ourselves our totals column in the end of this table. See how there was no month for this column, so it just created a new column name for it. You can totally go and just rename it yourself. Total for year. The next common need that you may have is to combine rows from multiple tables. Like, for some reason you may have tasks in multiple tables. Normally it's the best practice to keep all the tasks in one table, but in collaborative environments, especially those involving crossdoc, it just may happen that you have your own table of tasks, and then you're also syncing in the table of tasks from one team, another team, maybe even from some external trackers, and so on. Or your calendars. You may have your local table with all sorts of events, but you're also syncing your Google Calendar, and you want to have a unified view and see all the conflicts on one common calendar. Again, we could do that in the past with a table and a button that would populate that table, but weren't you jealous at how easy and effortless it seemingly was in Notion? Well, now you can set this all up with the help of a formula table. Okay, now we will be combining data from multiple tables, and here is the idiom to do it. First, we create an empty list. We need some sort of a dummy to add data to. And then we use the splice function to append values to it from other lists. We start from the beginning, delete 0 elements, and then we just enumerate all task names from the local table, comma, and all the summaries from the events table. And if we had our third table, fourth table, and so on, we would just keep enumerating those columns. Now repeat the same for the starts and ends of each event. Done. And of course, don't forget to add that piece of code in the end. Now pay attention, this time we again are supplying values column by column, but we don't want to get them transposed, we don't want to turn them into rows. So you have to change the orientation of this table to columns. Press sync. And here is our table of combined events. Also, don't forget to change the types of start and end columns to date and time. And now we are ready to create a calendar view. Okay, this thing is acting up for some reason. It doesn't recognize the start and end as date time. Maybe when I do that data typing fix, it will actually work. Well, you can always add another column. And here as well. And then all you have to do is for the start column reflect the start value, and for the end column reflect the end value. And now magically all these events will appear on your calendar. Make it a week one and voila. Here are all our events. And we can already see the overlaps. Now, of course, none of these are editable. You cannot drag these events around or change their titles. In fact, none of our formula tables are editable. You can only get them as read-only. That's because there's just no way to know what we are going to edit when you want to change this or this. All these values are supplied to the pack as is. It just doesn't have a way to know where to apply those changes were you to make some. However, what you can do is include the relations so that you know that this row comes from this row and this row here comes from this row. Let's do this. All we need to do for that is to include yet another column where we just enumerate all the rows from tasks and all the rows from events. We sync this in, and yes, now we have one column of references from one table and here from another table, so it's like a mixed type column. Of course, we could bother about that and create two separate columns here and somehow calculate that in the first column we need to keep the last 3 rows blank and in another column we have to keep the first 5 rows blank. But it's easier to just sync them all like this and then create 2 separate columns ourselves. The first is a relation column to tasks local and it's a single select. The second is the relation to the Google Calendar and again. And now write your formulas like if it's a row from the local table, then include this row, otherwise keep it blank. And for Google Calendar events, the formula will be similar, only this time we are checking if this row is from table of Google Calendar events. Now we can also add some conditional formats so that, for instance, if it's a task from Google Calendar, we paint it blue. And our calendar will already have that differentiation. But still, we'd like to be able to edit the data in those linked rows. Well, here is what you can do. When you click on any of these events, it will open you the detailed view of this event. Remember that this is a row from our formula table, so you cannot really edit anything right here. But what you can do is that you can edit your layout, hide the unnecessary stuff, make it a little bit nicer, and show both the local event and the gcal event references here. Now I hope you can see where this is going already. We want to turn these into subtables so that we can edit data in them. And our layout here is just like a shell. Now if you look into this, there is no way to display it as a table. But this is only because to display this as a subtable, Coda expects you to allow multiple selections. That's the trick for you. You turn on this toggle again, and now this toggle here appears. And you can actually make it look not like a table, but display it as detail, and do the same with your local event. And you have to go back out of the layout editor for your row to set up the layouts of these subtables, put the navigation in the bottom, same here, and of course set up the layouts of these individual subtables. Now whenever you click on a local event, you can change it right here, like change the duration to 3 hours. And for the Google Calendars events, you can change them here, like set the end time and then send the edits back to the Google Calendar through the two-way sync. And yes, since this table is read-only and it didn't update automatically, even though if you're curious enough, all you could do was just combine a table of these linked rows and do the rest with the formulas. To think of it, that is also a possibility, to create your combined table just with this column and calculate the rest out of these two to make it even more dynamic. But yeah, since we set it up like this, you have to click refresh, and now the new dates and times will appear here and the events will look now differently on your calendars. Okay, the third big need. Imagine we have a list of tasks like this, and each task can be assigned to one or multiple people. Now we want to make a view of this table grouped by a person, and we want to see which tasks are assigned to each person. But when we group on the assigned to column, what we get are groups like this, because these are like different values. It doesn't show up the client meeting both for Adam and for Brian. Coda understands that the list of these two is a different value than the separately that one and this one. And to think of it, it makes sense, because this row only exists once here, and a view absolutely reflects the original table. But okay, maybe we will have better luck with charts. Let's see how well each of the employees perform. But no, these also become separate groups here. So how do we solve it? Again, with a formula. And here it is, our table with all tasks normalized. Now let's take a look into its formula, but I warn you, it's not for cowards. This here may look super scary, but let me explain it to you and you'll understand it. On this line, we're basically just extracting all people. Frankly, we could have just used the table of people directly, but I wanted to show you the way how to do it like this. We take all the assignees, combine the list into a single list of all people, with each person perhaps being there multiple times, and then we only take the unique people, and this is how we get our list, which we store into variable assignees. Next, for each assignee, we filter all the tasks that belong to this assignee. Or actually, we're looking for all the tasks that have this person as one of its assignees. And then for each found task, we create a pair, where the first item is a person and the second item is the task. If you take a look at what we get at this step is, we get a list of groups. Each group has as many pairs as there are tasks for this person, this person, this person, and so on. Unfortunately, in Coda, there is no way to just unwrap these groups and combine these into a list of pairs but preserve those pairs. So the next step is we have to list combine. And unfortunately it removes the internal lists as well. But it gives us one big list where we know that each odd item is a person and each even item is a task. Person, task, person, task. So what we have to do next is create a list half the size, basically create numbers 0, 1, 2, 3 and so on until the half of the list, and for each such index recreate that pair. And in the end we get our nice list of lists where each internal list is a pair of person to task, person to task, person to task with no unnecessary grouping. And when we sync our table, this is what we get. And we can now totally group by people, and we can totally turn it into a chart. And you can also do the opposite. When you have a normalized table like this on the left, you can totally create a formula table with one row per task and all assignees combined with a formula like this. Now don't bother typing these out from the screen, all of these demos will be available in the guide doc. Okay, I had a few more demos for you, but my computer is already struggling to keep up with such an amount of content. And you're probably too. So it's about time to wrap it up. You've seen the power of this pack, now let's talk about the weaknesses. The biggest weakness that you could notice the first is that these tables don't update dynamically. Whenever the data in the formula changes, it just doesn't update automatically. You have to click refresh. This is the limitation of automations and packs in Coda, and currently there is no way to trigger a refresh based on a change somewhere. The best you can do right now is build yourself some indication that the data in your source table changed after the refresh of the formula table happened. In the formula table there is a hidden column last modified at, which you can compare to the modified timestamp of your source table. And then you can create some fancy callout that will prompt the user to refresh the table. You can see it as a benefit though, because no matter how complicated the formula is, and by all means it should have been recalculating every second, it is actually not, it will only be recalculated upon refresh, meaning that you don't have to worry about this slowing down your docs. The second weakness, and we talked about it, is that the values that you sync in are read-only. That's because we don't pass the pointers where this table would read data from, but we actually pass our data. Like when we create our lists, that's how we pass our data. That's why two-way sync is just technically not possible. That said, as you've seen in our calendar example, you can actually mix in some references and make the original data editable from your formula table views. Then also, because we pass data as is and it's calculated at the moment we pass it, none of the volatile stuff will work as you'd expect. For example, here we try to pass the now, but it doesn't become a formula, we just pass the current timestamp at the moment the sync was triggered. Actually, there is a way to sneak in a live formula in there, and not only a formula. formula. But I'll talk about all these hacky hacks in a separate video. Or the user, don't even try to make this dependent on the user, because whoever last refreshed this table would be the user. So if you want to combine all your tasks from different tables, don't just combine your tasks, combine all tasks from all people and then filter down the formula table just for you. Or alternatively, create yourself a separate formula table that none of your collaborators will use. Also, you can see that whenever we create a table, all the columns will be of type text. That's because text columns can accommodate any type of data. And for this launch, I didn't implement any sort of fancy auto detection of the type. For now, it's up to you that if you know that all the values in a column are of the same type, you go and change it to the right format. I understand this is suboptimal, like in our example with the P&L. This means you have to go and update all the 12 columns for each month. So in my future releases, I may add some sort of auto detection, or at least allow you to set this up in some efficient way programmatically. Finally, you have to be mindful of the pack's limits. The limit on the data you can pass to a formula table is 4 megabytes. That said, 4 megabytes is a lot of data. Like here is our sales doc and I'm combining a table of all the receipts and it has over 11,000 receipts in it, and the resulting size is just below 3 megabytes. And pack tables can only have 10,000 rows, so this already exceeds it. That said, it's always a good idea not to cram all your data into a formula table, but only run it on a subset that you actively need to work with. This is all from me today. Please give this pack a try, the link is in the description. It is a premium pack that I put a lot of care and knowledge into, and it opens up a lot of possibilities, and candidly, if it becomes popular and a lot of companies use it, I'll be more inclined to support it. And I'm also very curious what you build with it. Please write in the comments below. And please give this video a like, and if you're new to the channel, please subscribe, and I see you in the next one.